Okay, uh, let's start. So, I hope that I'm audible, right? And the slide is visible.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, what happened? Hmm. So far, what we have seen in details to some extent that who shares the burden of the tax. But the next question that we must carefully address is the moment the tax is imposed, or at least partially, I have to bear the burden of the tax, then how shall I behave? So basically, impact of tax on economic behavior, right? So there is a very simple uh, understanding that uh, suppose income tax is increased, or say that there was no income tax before, now income tax is being imposed. Okay. So first thing first, either I have to consume less because my disposable income has come down, or I have to work more to maintain my previous level of consumption. It's a very simple, straight, simple economic logic. So, what actually happens? Take, for example, we are talking about an individual who can choose between who has soda and beer in his consumption basket. And suppose there is this new tax on beer. Fine. Initially, his budget constraint was given by this gray colored budget line SB. Equilibrium was E. Now look, this budget line will pivot from S and it will shift from SB to SB prime after the tax is imposed on beer. And now suppose E star is the new equilibrium. That's how it should look like. Right. Now we need to decompose this into two very simple parts. This was our total impact. This is what we can see that this person, and as you can see, it was I do not know whether by choice or by just by accident. mm, E and E prime are lying at the same level, horizontal level, which means consumption of soda has not moved. I think this is by construct for this example. So now, what I can see that he has reduced. What if we need to decompose this total effect into two parts? One, because a tax is imposed, my disposable income has come down. So there will be an income effect. Second thing, as compared to the pre-tax scenario, beer has become costly relatively, then soda has become cheaper. So I will replace beer with soda. That will be my substitution effect. So how to capture it? First thing first, what types of tax do we have? And let's connect it to the Hicksian decomposition theory you have learned in our microeconomics. So the Hicksian decomposition theory will say, okay, let's concentrate on SB prime and this indifference curve giving the utility level I prime and this new equilibrium E star. Somehow this individual has moved from E to E star because of a change in price of beer. Good. Then this decomposition will tell me, ask me to do this first thing. Try to find out the amount of money I should take away from him. So the income that should be reduced so that this individual attains a utility level I prime. From this, obviously, the benchmark scenario is SB indifference curve giving utility level I equilibrium E. That is your benchmark pre-tax, pre-price change. So what we will do? We'll shift SB indifference curve lateral to S hat B hat and see where it becomes tangent to this I prime and we'll get E hat. Fine. What we have done, we have taken away money straight away from this person such that he attains the same utility level I prime. So he becomes indifferent with E star and E hat. So what we will say that the movement from E to E hat is the pure income effect. And a movement from E hat to E star is a substitution, right? I don't think there will be any confusion. We have done these things so many times. Now, the question that we need to ask is what type of tax structure one should consider while doing this analysis. So we start with this idea that where tax which is being imposed, suppose the beer tax on beer is fully shifted forward and the consumer bears the entire burden of it. We start with that simple benchmark case. Now, before moving further, we need to, I will say, concentrate on few seemingly trivial but actually non-trivial impacts or effects when the tax is borne fully by the consumer. First thing first, whatever the tax may be, whichever type of tax it may be, it will affect my consumption. That is for sure. One. Second thing is the moment a tax is imposed by the government, the purpose of such imposition of tax is nothing but to shift some oranges from Friday to the government. Right? Remember that Robinson Crusoe Friday? Take some oranges from here, give it to there. The second welfare theorem, initial beginning. But if I need to redistribute the initial wealth, first thing first, the government need to shift the purchasing power from the people who are being taxed to the government. Now you remember some oranges are lost. So if I want to minimize this loss, eradicate or completely eliminate this loss, then only I can attain an efficient tax system. Now just look, the movement from E to E hat, or the simple idea that takes some money away from this individual so that he attains the same level of utility I prime which he would get when you tax his BA. And that means I should impose a lump sum tax on him. Now there are two things parallelly going on. One, what type of tax? We are already talking about two types. One is a tax on the commodity, BA. Another is a lump sum tax. Sorry. If I go on with this uh, commodity tax, the new equilibrium will give E star. On the other hand, if I go with lump sum tax, E hat will be the equilibrium. Is there a difference? As we'll see, there is a lot of difference. The difference is the moment you impose a lump sum tax, not only consumption will change from E to hat, but government collects this vertical intercept between the two budget lines, which is SB and SB, is S at B hat, as revenue, right? As the tax revenue. The moment you move from E hat to E star, what is happening? You are replacing beer with soda. So you are consuming mm, this much of beer less. Then the government is going to lose the tax revenue on that much unit of beer because you are no more consuming that much amount of beer. The moment you go for a commodity tax, there will be substitution effects where, which means consumers will tend to replace the taxable commodities with the non-taxable commodities. In this case, soda is the non-taxable commodity, beer is the taxable commodity. Now, the other thing is the moment you impose a lump sum tax, the individual has nothing to do with that lump sum tax has nothing to do with the relative price of these two goods. So there will be no substitution effect. It will be a pure movement from E to E hat. The movement from E hat to E star will be eliminated. So the question is, for the same revenue that the government earns, how much these individuals are worse off, how much more these individuals are worse off when you have a commodity tax as benchmarked with a lump sum tax. Because this extra loss is what we call the deadweight loss. So we can also revert the question that fraud, look the flip side. Now we talked about for the same level of tax revenue, what will be the level of welfare in lump sum tax vis-a-vis a commodity tax. The flip side, we can always ask that if we want to keep the welfare level or utility level of an individual fixed at a certain uh, point, then how much extra revenue a lump sum tax could have raised instead of this commodity tax? Right? So let's try to measure the simple deadweight loss from this very simple indifference curve. The moment you put a lump sum tax movement from E to E hat, that vertical intercept will be the revenue in the lump sum tax. That much money you have taken away from that individual. Where did that money go? To the government. But the moment you impose a commodity tax, you are at E star, not at E hat. Now with E star, you have less amount of beer in the consumption basket of the individual which is to be taxed. So if you can see A E star, that particle intercept will give the revenue when you have a tax on the commodity. So the difference which is E star F, that much of revenue is lost because the government have chosen to impose a commodity tax instead of a lump sum tax, keeping the same welfare level I prime for that individual. So the very simple intercept E star F is the deadweight loss associated with a tax on beer as compared to a lump sum tax, which would keep this individual in the same utility level, I think. The moment you have, take for example, L-shaped ICs, which are meant for complements, right? Which means all other goods and beer in this example is consumed at a particular proportion, a fixed proportion. In that case, a lump sum tax and the tax on beer would have been the same tax revenue, and hence there is no deadweight loss. Look, if I keep on consuming at the same proportion, I'm not substituting beer with other goods because there is no substitution effect. So it is the substitution effect which actually captures the degree of your vehicle loss. So we are back to what we talked about, compensated demand curves, right? Now with compensated demand curve, I can simply understand or simply see the substitution and see what type of deadweight loss is generated. So moving away from this a little cumbersome graph which considers the tax good and the non-tax good together to this very simple partial equilibrium graph where I am considering only the taxed component. Because with Hicksian demand curve, I have removed that income effect. I'm left only with substitution effect. And hence, I'm left with that component which gives me the measure of my deadweight loss. The moment I replace normal demand curve with compensated demand curves, even in the partial equilibrium framework, I can simply see the deadweight loss. Now you might ask why the supply curve is a horizontal line. Remember, we started with the scenario and we still stuck with the scenario where the consumer bears the entire burden of the commodity tax. Right? That is why we have kept that the supply curve is infinitely elastic. So now, first thing, the moment you impose a tax of the rate T, your quantity which is to be consumed will fall from Q2 to Q1. The government will collect a tax T on that, and its simple shaded triangle will give you deadweight loss. Now, first thing we need to understand about the relationship between tax rate and the deadweight loss or the inefficiency being generated. So suppose initially you had a tax rate small t, then the deadweight loss was BCE. The moment you double the tax rate to twice t, the deadweight loss is will increase more than proportionally to B prime C prime E. Next relationship, the more you increase the elasticity in absolute terms, the deadweight loss also increases. So you have a less elastic demand curve given by the blue demand curve. Your deadweight loss was BCE, flatter, the deadweight loss becomes BCE prime. Now, we have seen so many features. Let's put everything together now. Then what should be the generic rule and the relationship between elasticity, tax rate, and the deadweight loss? What should be the relationship? So, we start with the definition of elasticity. And remember, all in the elasticity, that when we are defining elasticity, as you can see, there is no negative sign here, which means I'm talking about the absolute or the mod, right? That's what we're doing. Now, we start with the definition of price elasticity of demand for a particular good. Nice. Del QQ, del PP. Rearrange that such that on the left hand side we have the shift or the marginal change in the quantity demanded, right? Now, let's look back to the last figure. Let's consider BE is that amount of quantity which was uh, which that BE is that change in quantity or the reduction in quantity which happened due to the tax rate, right? Because initially we're consuming at E, after the tax we're consuming at C. So the amount of quantity you have reduced due to introduction of the tax is that the length BE. Now what is BE? It is basically the delta Q. What is the delta P here? The tax rate T. So we can say BE is nothing but T by P into Q into the elasticity mu. Now what would be again let's go back. From here what we could see, BCEE was my deadweight loss. What is the value of BCE? Half perpendicular by base, right? So T into BE by 2. Now let's put back the values. Value of PE is T by P into Q into mu multiplied by T by 2. So the area of the triangle, you can simply see it's half T square by P into Q into U. So what is the relation? The relation you can see, one, as we have already discussed, if the value of mu in absolute terms increases, the elasticity increases, then the area of the triangle will go up, obviously, in the same proportion. Which means the deadweight loss will increase. But if the tax rate goes up by T, the area of the triangle or the deadweight loss will go up by the relation is T square, right? So if you increase the tax rate by T, then this what we call the deadweight loss will increase not only more than proportionally, but in the squared term. This is exactly what we have found so far using the simple graphs. But this is the basic relationship. Now, the moment you have your tax rate and elasticity, the initial price P and the initial quantity which was, so initial PQ. So pre-tax PQ, elasticity and the tax rate, you can simply calculate using this formula. And you can see the relationship between the tax rate, the elasticity, and inefficiency. Very simple. Now, this was the understanding when we talked about the implication of a commodity tax vis-a-vis a lump sum tax where the tax burden falls entirely on the consumer. Question A. So at least in the long run, what happened? Is the slide visible?
No, sir.
Slide is visible. Okay. No, it somehow showed that the slide.
No, sir, it's not visible.
Yeah, that's what showing thing. What happened? Ravi, you wanted to say something? Is the slide visible now? Is the slide visible
No, sir,
now?
it's still not.
Now, this is not a problem from my end. I think this is with the teams. Okay, just hold on for a second. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, fine. Now, back. Okay. Now, as we had discussed in our last lecture, that there is a difference regarding the elasticity of these demand or supply curves when we talk about the run, the other short run, long run, right? So at least in the short run, in the long run, you can actually go for that everything is fine. I can accommodate all the changes and I can have a horizontal uh, supply curve. But at least in the short run, most of these supply curves will be upward sloping, right? That whenever you have a tax on the commodity, some burden will also fall on the producer. So the deadweight loss attached to the producer part is simply this one, right? So had there been no tax, G with tax, you get this deadweight loss triangle VGH. Now let's club these things together and also bring in the demand curve and the compensated demand curve. Now this graph looks a little cumbersome, but let's start with the compensated demand curve and the supply curve. Okay, so forget about the demand curve for the time. Now when you start with a compensated demand curve, and we know that partially the tax rate will be borne by the producer and partially by the consumer. So what we say, look at the vertical axis, we have these three values of P, PS, P, PC. Had there been no tax, then the question of substitution effect, income effect, compensated demand curves would not have arisen. PQ would give me the equilibrium market clearing price quantity combination. First thing first. Now I have a tax, and to measure the deadweight loss, I have calculated the compensated demand curve. And what I see, post tax, the price of the commodity that the consumer has to pay has gone up to P subscript C. And because the producer also bears a portion of this tax, the price that the producer gets post tax is P subscript S, such that the difference, which is PC minus PS, is the tax rate. If this is the scenario, then what is the deadweight loss of the consumer? ABD, right? What is the deadweight loss coming? That from the producer, BCE. Now, let's assume that if I consider a scenario, or I assume that the consumer's demand is not very sensitive to this very small change in income. Suppose this tax rate is marginal, a little bit. So his income effect is very small. Then his demand curve is, let's assume his demand curve is not sensitive to the small changes. Then basically the compensated demand curve will coincide with that of the demand curve. And if that is the case, then the consumer deadweight loss will become ABE, and the total deadweight loss from imposition of this tax on commodity will become the area ACE. Correct? Now we bring in the impact. So far, what we have seen, impact of tax on consumption, right? And the impact of tax on consumption, as well as how much deadweight loss or inefficiency that is being generated due to a commodity tax as compared to a simple lump sum tax. Remember, we started our lecture by saying that if there is a tax, either I will consume less or there is a possibility I might work more. So let's try to investigate that part as well. For that, we revert back to that overlapping generations model that we are considering for the last 2-3 lectures continuously. So the space in front of you is no more consumption of beer and soda, but consumption today and consumption tomorrow. And as we know that suppose today my wage is W naught, depending on how much I love future consumption to present consumption, I will decide my C naught or today's consumption. So if W naught is more than C naught, that will be my savings, right? And hence this will be the picture in front of us. Similarly, if I want to have or I value present consumption more than future consumption, these will be the locations of W naught and C naught, and E will be the equilibrium. Now, no problem. Impact of income tax. Yes. Who was there? Not about who. What was happening? And in fact, I could not see from whose microphone that sound came. But if that is a background noise, how can you listen to a lecture? My God. Anyway, so again, we have a little complicated graph in front of us. What you do in this case, that the interest that I earn by saving today, that is being taxed. What happens then? What happens to my consumption decision? First thing first, as you can see, if I want to take away, because income remains same, it is only the savings or the earning from my savings, that interest part, which is being taxed. So it will pivot around W, the point W. And look, E hat will be the equilibrium. And the same analysis, if we wanted to take away some money so that this individual is indifferent between E hat and E star, then you are taking the budget constraint. That will be exactly a lateral shift of the original. Correct. So what is the deadweight loss? If there was a lump sum tax, then you move from E to E hat. If there is a tax on the interest rate, then basically what changes? The interest earning which is being taxed. So the slope of this budget, what is this budget? C naught plus C1 by 1 plus R is equal to W naught plus W1 by 1 plus R. That's my equation, right? So this 1 plus R is being taxed, so slope changes. So E star becomes my equilibrium when this tax on interest is being imposed. Now, how much is the deadweight loss? Again, as you can see, if we had imposed a lump sum tax, this much E star F would have been extra tax revenue would have been generated. So, when we talk about the tax on income, but particularly the income earned through labor, the wage, the first thing that happens is the worker will try to evade a little bit of tax. If I work more, I have to pay more taxes. It's better for me to work less and have a little bit more leisure. And this is the substitution we're talking about. The substitution here is between leisure and work or income. Now we have two things. My income is being taxed. The income effect of that income tax tells me to work more. The substitution effect of that income tax tells me to work less. So they move in opposite directions. So suppose now look, in this case, reading the graph is a little different from all the graphs we have studied so far. Here in the horizontal axis, we have leisure. So L, that point tells me the maximum amount of leisure that I can have. The origin 0 tells me 0 leisure, I work 24/7. Now look into the graphs. Income is being taxed. So the more I work, so the movement from L to the origin, there will be a movement of this budget curve or budget line. So because the amount of leisure L tells me that I just do not do anything. I just sit in my couch throughout the day. No work, entirely leisure. Then the movement will pivot from L. So if there is, So pre-budget, equilibrium E, post-income tax, equilibrium E star. Replace this income tax by a lump sum tax, you get E hat. So if I would have taken only the income effect of a tax which tells me to work more, there will be a movement from E to E hat. Because E to E hat, you can see leisure is less. On the contrary, when I more bring in the substitution effect as well, then there is a movement from E hat to E star, which tells me to work less and have leisure more. That's why a movement from E hat to E star. If somehow, look, we have done it by construct, somehow you keep the amount of leisure and hence work same. That is why E star is exactly below, vertically below E. Then obvious thing is to consume this. Now, this part, which is the backward bending part of the labor supply curve, here the income effect is stronger than the substitution effect. And that is why the labor after tax increases a little bit more. Because the income effect tells me to work a little bit more. Because the wage you get before tax was much higher, the wage you get after tax is quite low. Because it is in that downward sloping or backward bending part of the supply curve, you increase your work because the income effect is stronger than the substitution effect. Now, when we talk about the other type of income tax, the progressive, the more I work, more will be my tax rates. But there is something also called that whenever we talk about progressive taxation, another thing comes along. That part is what we call income tax credit, which means if you save a little bit, you get some relief. Now, we start from L. Had there been no income tax credit, LL, that flat blue line, would have given you your consumption, leisure, choice, or budget line. But now what do you see? If I work a little bit, so that stretch AL, LA, LA, movement will be from right hand side to left hand side because L is the maximum amount of leisure possible, say 24 hours. Movement to the origin means I work, I earn income. So LA, here the tax credit is high because the tax amount is very low. And so these people will work a little bit more and look at the steep jump on the consumption. A to B is parallel to LL. B to C. It is that stretch where earning more through working more starts eating away because of increased taxes. C2D, you substitute with a lot of leisure. Because if you want to work more even than 24 hours work, it is bet because my then the D is less than L, which means the tax is so high, it's better to didn't get the tax free. So this part is below L. Now, effects of this progressive taxation. So far in this last graph, we saw is how many hours I put into the work, right? Because it's a choice between labor and leisure. So here, a movement from L to A to B, B to C, C to D tells me the choice bit of or the impact on the hours, how many work hours I work. But it also decides whether to participate in the workforce or not. So in this progressive taxation, it is not only about a choice of consumption and leisure, or a choice of income and hence working hours and consumption. No, it's also about whether to participate at all. Because for very high income individuals, it is better not to participate because the tax rate is so high. Now there is a small bullet point, secondary labor force participation. This is true for India as well. So the book that we cover, we have used so far, the Stiglitz book, it talks about the US economy, but this secondary labor force participation, it's also quite important for Indian scenario. What is secondary labor force participation? In a number of families, there are certain primary earners and some secondary earners. Okay. So take for example, let's think of an absolutely rural Indian household, a village farmer. Let's assume he earns enough so that he comes under the taxable bracket. That's the assumption. So not only he works, his kids also work here and there. Now assume all these incomes are taxed not as individual income but as household income. Suppose the primary earner of that family earns enough such that he is at a point B or even C. If he is at B, then till C, the secondary earning member might work. But when the household income increases beyond C, the secondary member might withdraw because it's becoming the highest slab possible. In India, say in the 33% bracket. So take for example, even when I'm not talking about say a primary earner or a secondary earner, I'm saying it's all about primary income and secondary income. Then also this is important. Suppose you are a salaried person. You earn such that your tax slab, the highest slab tax slab is 20% in India or 25%. Now you also have some time left and you want to take up a parallel work, maybe some consultancy sort of. You earn a little bit more. You go to the 30% slab. Would you like to take one more consultancy? Because that will push you to the 33%. No. Why should I work? It is, I have already earned enough. I already have enough money. It's better for me now to shift to leisure rather than work. Now, unfortunately, in India, the problem is when we talk about the secondary labor force participation, I'm not talking about any judgment. I'm talking about data. The secondary labor force participation is predominantly women participation in the labor force. And that's a very, very problematic part of this progressive taxation. The primary member is the husband, secondary earning member is the wife. I'm not talking about, let me be very clear, I am not talking about any judgment or any value system. What I'm talking about is pure raw data. So the statement that I'm going to make right now is based only and only on data. Because of this higher revised rates of taxes in different things, not only about your wage or salary, but on other earnings also, like the earnings from your interest from bank savings, all these earnings. What has happened over the time, a lot of educated women, a lot of qualified women have left the job market. And this has been devastating for the economy. Absolutely devastating for the economy. If anyone is interested, there is this labor economist from Kerala. His name is Vinod Abraham. He has worked a lot on this area. And the findings from his works are really, really scary. It is not the families which are asking the women to stay away from the job market. It's the women, they are voluntarily withdrawing because I'm giving less time, the time which can be given to the family and the kids becomes more important because this added income is so much highly taxed. Anything and everything what I earn is under the 30% slab. And this has become a problem. So this is the first part of our lecture today.
Sir, but in
Yes.
Indian
Yes.
context, household income is not taxed, right? Like the government taxes individual income.
No, 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 no. There is a difference. There is, if you go to the income tax portal, there is something called undivided Hindu family. It's again quite ironic, but it's there. The undivided Hindu household. And let me try to give you one more example, not necessarily maybe on the tax side, but uh, do you know there is a component called house rent allowance when you get a job? HRA.
I've
There is
heard
a
of it,
basic,
sir.
there is a basic salary, there is a DNS allowance DA, and there is an HRA. I stay in the campus. So the rule of HRA is either depending on which type of city, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 city, there is an HRA, which is basically a percentage of your basic salary. So if it's a tier 1 city, metro city, it's 24%. Tier 2, 16%, tier 3, 8%. 8, 16, 24. Present. Okay. The rule is if I do not take accommodation, or if my institute or if my employer does not provide me with any facility of accommodation, then I'll get this 24%. Okay. In Kharagpur, I think it's 16%. It's a tier 2 city. Or the moment I take, say, campus accommodation, or my employer takes care of my house rent, then I do not get that HRA component. Now, suppose my wife, which is in fact, she teaches in an institute located in Bangalore. Two different places. She will also not get the HRA, neither HRA nor housing accommodation, because her husband is already getting HRA from a different institute. So the two members from the same family are not entitled to each other. So until and unless she has a very strong motivation for work, she will say, why should I spend so much staying in Bangalore and get nothing for each other? It's better for me to stay in Kharagpur and have a leisurely life with the kid. Simple. That's how the taxation happens. Not necessarily every time it should be the direct income tax part. There can be indirect taxations which affects your household income. And when I'm talking about this, just have a look. You just look into this undivided Hindu family. It's a very weird rule, but it's still there. So whenever you pay the tax or file for income tax, you do not choose yourself as individual. You choose yourself as undivided Hindu family. That rule is still there. But all these taxation, particularly the progressive taxation part and non-provision of certain job-related, uh, what I could say, side payments. So HRA is a side payment over and above your basic salary, but you consider that as a part of your salary, because that component, if you stay outside the campus, you get the HRA. HRA income is also taxable. And that is why it is better to take accommodation inside and not to claim the HRA, because then their taxable income comes down. Now, once the primary member, now who decided who is the primary member in my case? It's not about I am male, I should get it. My wife is a female, she should be the secondary. No, it's not about that. It's about who started job life before. I started job life before, so I'm already the primary earner. The moment the the second person, not the secondary, the second person starts earning, all these benefits are taken away from me. Rather, not from me. If they had taken it from me, it could have been a little more uh, understandable. It is the system is robbing her from her what I can say. Uh, I'm just at loss in the word. I cannot find that term. Had I was not the counterfactual, suppose I was not working, should have got all these benefits. Because I'm working, she is not getting these benefits. And that actually takes until and unless someone is strongly motivated, it's very difficult. If you look only from the economic side of it, look whether I should work or not, there are two parts. And the only part we are looking at here is the economic part of it, the monetary, the financial part of it. But there are people who are more motivated about working. It's all more about, not about, it's less about your income, but more about your engagement. So until and unless you have a motivation of that sort, you end up with the results like Vinoj Abraham found out. Women labor force participation, particularly in the skilled group, is coming down. And there is a one-to-one correlation between the tax structure of an economy. And as you have seen, it's not only about tax, it's not only about income tax, it's also about whether certain, say, interest rate, whether that will be taxed or not, whether savings is taxed or not. In India, only a portion of the savings is not taxed. One portion, up to 2.5 lakhs annually. If you save 2.5 lakhs, that only 2.5 lakhs is not saved. So there is not an incentive to save more than 2.5 lakhs. It's better you consume. And the government says that's one way of the Keynesian push. You consume, someone else will earn, income will go up, but at the same time, you are also losing a lot of investments because people do not have much incentive to save. Even if I save, that's not tax exempted. Okay, so let me start. Okay, the slide has gone again. I do not know what is happening. It's quite ridiculous. Quite ridiculous. Yeah. Now it's visible again. Fine. Now, so far, we have studied and we have found out that any other tax other than a lump sum tax will generate inefficiency. Then the question is, if a lump sum tax is actually the most efficient, is the only efficient tax, then why do we have so many taxes and so many deadweight losses? Now, this particular question is central to what we call the theory of taxation. So, can we, if we can impose a non-distortionary lump sum tax, then why do we at all go for distortionary taxation like commodity taxes or income taxes? Second thing is, even for some reason, obviously there should be some reason why any government in the world will go for inefficient distortionary taxes. All the countries, they impose distortion taxes. So there is a reason for that. Then the next question that one should ask, that if we are suppose we have to impose distortionary taxes, then there is a mechanism of reducing or minimizing the deadweight loss, or what is optimal taxation? Now, there are certain fallacies. The fallacy number one, that instead of a number of distortion, so number of taxes and hence n number of distortions, it's better to have one distortion. So you remove these additional taxes like taxes of commodities, tax on savings, tax on interest rate earnings. So just simply tax the wage income. Because somehow, if your tax on wage income comes with no distortions, then that will be nothing but an equivalent of lump sum taxation. Right? Look at the budget constraint, you just reduce I. You're not tampering with anything else. Then that should be equivalent to lump sum taxation. The problem is the moment you have this tax on your wage income, as we have just seen, individuals' choice about work, working hours, even participation, everything changes. Second point, is it better to have a number of small taxes, and hence remember deadweight loss is proportional to the square of the tax rate. So it might be better that it's take numerous number of taxes, very small rates, and hence you have smaller deadweight losses, rather than a very large dead tax, where the deadweight loss will be in terms of square of that tax rate. So it might be better. So you start with the argument that one distortion is better than a number of distortions. But when you logically reason, then you find the opposite actually is true. That it is better to have a number of small taxes vis-a-vis one single large tax. Now, again, that is debatable, because then you need to exactly calculate the tax, all the pre-equilibrium price, quantity, wage, income, everything, pre-tax and post-tax. And then we have to compare the total deadweight loss with smaller taxes, a set of small taxes, vis-a-vis a large tax. So it's again open to debate. Fallacy number two. Now, it basically comes from the theory of second best. That, what is the theory of second best? It actually started from the economist Lancaster. He said that a commodity is not actually a commodity, but a bunch of characteristics. So basically, a smartphone is not actually a smartphone, but it is a package of a number of characteristics like screen size, resolution, number of whether it's a Snapdragon or Exynos or whatever, internal memory, the whatever you can understand. There can be so many number of features. Now, you also have a budget. So you go to the market not to particularly purchase a particular phone, but you go to the market to purchase a phone having these many characteristics where all of us, take for example, I can see two names, Sagar and Gaurav. Gaurav's ranking of these characteristics might be completely different from that of Sagar's. Right? Suppose Gaurav prefers more on the screen resolution, Sagar might be on the megapixel of the camera. And rest of the features are ranked similar. Right? So when you go to the market with a budget, you might see that your favorite bundle or ranked characteristics are not available within the budget that you have. So you might have to relax some of your characteristics, preferred characteristics, or preferred ranking of these characteristics. And the second best which is available, which fits to your budget, you go for that one. That's the theory of second best. And it actually explains a number of consumer behavior when it comes to particularly differentiated products. Right? So that's a view. The theory of second best, now it will talk about that. Let's reconnect this theory with that of taxation. If I cannot achieve, say, my target tariff revenue, or say target welfare resource requirement, I know I have to give 3 oranges to Friday. Sorry. Then I must collect at least 3 oranges from Crusoe. Because if I cannot collect 3 oranges from Crusoe, I cannot give 3 oranges to Friday. Now I know there can be distortion. So I need to take at least 4 oranges because 1 orange will be lost. The day it lost. Now the question is, I know there can be different targets of a government. It's budget target, it's fiscal target, so many targets. It's welfare targets. It's Millennium Development Goal, Sustainable Development Goal targets. And it needs to impose taxes. The theory of second best then tells you it is the Pareto efficiency. Remember the conditions of Pareto efficiency, the Samuelson condition. Whatever I pay, I must get that in the marginal terms or in absolute terms. Right. So marginal benefit equated to the tax share or total benefit equated to total tax I pay. So these Pareto efficiency conditions are seldom met. But how far do I deviate from Pareto efficiency? Because I have certain targets, I have to get that much of revenue, then I will sacrifice a little bit of Pareto efficiency and settle with the second best alternative, where I sacrifice Pareto efficiency maybe marginally, but I achieve my targets because I'm bound by my targets. Now the question is, that if there are certain distortions, then the theory of second best tells you do not do anything. But this is a gross misrepresentation of the idea. It is better to have multiple small distortions to one large one. And it just tells you that particularly for developed economies where these sustainable development goals have been already been implemented and everything is done, where the pressure on the government is much less, you cannot just blindly copy them. Not one size fits all. As simple as that. So, to get into a Pareto efficient tax structure, you need to what I will say, again, today I'm at loss of words most of the time, what is happening. You need to ensure that there does not exist any alternative tax structure which can make at least one individual better off and no one else worse off. Now, if that happens, that means moving from the present structure to that structure, you are making Pareto improvement. So you can have a set of Pareto efficient tax structures. Take, for example, the Lindell one, who started with efficiency. Even the demand revealing tax system. Or you can have a number of Pareto efficient resource allocations without any tax. Now, the core idea behind this, that the only difference among these different allocations with or without taxes are nothing but differences in distributions, right? So you have a social welfare function, and you can choose different Pareto optimal allocations or Pareto efficient allocations using that welfare function. So that is basically, remember, suppose you have initial endowment, then you can have a Pareto set starting a contract curve starting from that endowment and set of preferences, right? So similarly, what is an optimal tax system? It is nothing but a set of taxes that maximizes a specific social welfare function. So if the social welfare function itself changes, or the definition of that welfare function changes, take for example, 10 years back or 20 years back, it was the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. Now you have the SDGs, right? So previously the social welfare function was hovering around the MDGs. Now it's about the SDGs. The moment your social welfare function changes, your optimal tax structure should also change. Now, if you're concerned with equality, you should go with progressive taxation. And with certain, some slides back, we have already seen there are so many problems with progressive taxation. It might generate. So if I want to go with equity, I have to sacrifice a lot of efficiency. Efficiency not only in the sense of deadweight loss, but maybe to the extent of labor force participation itself. So when we come to say lump sum taxes, it is the only tax which is efficient, right? Now, any other tax other than lump sum will generate some distortion. So the government could raise this amount, the same amount of revenue with the lump sum tax and still make each of the individuals who are taxed better off. Now there is this triviality that if all individuals in the society are alike, then also you do not require redistribution of income. This is a triviality. So if I do not require redistribution in income, we can achieve both equity and efficiency by imposing a uniform lump sum tax. Now, in reality, because these individuals differ and you need to have some sense of the policymaker to have which allocation is Pareto optimal or which Pareto optimal allocation to be chosen, and hence how much redistribution has to be done, and hence with the ability to pay argument, who can pay vis-a-vis who just cannot pay. So all these things we have discussed before, right? Now we are clubbing everything together. Now, if I want every individual to pay different taxes, it might not necessarily be distortionary. I should just equate the marginal benefit to the tax share, the Lindell one. It's not required to impose some income or excise tax, which are distortionary taxes, right? Now, here comes the idea of the ability part. The government needs to ascertain who is more able to pay taxes rather than the situation where it imposes larger taxes on certain individuals. So how can I measure the abilities of individuals? Now, government cannot observe the abilities. The only thing that the government can get data for are income and expenditure. So either you have to go for a lump sum taxation, which is the lump sum taxation has one major flaw. What is the flaw? You have to pay irrespective of your ability. Or the government has an option of putting some distortionary tax which is based on certain variables, or as we'll say, the proxies for ability, say income or expenditure. So, and not only that, just look at the first bullet point. Suppose two people have the same income. And the fault in this is that one person has low ability but works like a donkey, and another person with much higher ability, and it's very easy for him to earn that level of income, right? So that would be a flaw with that lump sum tax. With some, suppose you are putting an uniform tax in a uniform tax bracket, income bracket. But still, from a societal point of view, most of the time you ask any person, apart from Elon Musk, who is vehemently opposed to this idea, that if you earn more, you should pay more tax. Because the loss of income of the rich is, in general, has less weight than the loss of income of the low income individuals, because this of some sense of equity that every society instills in individuals. And that is why, instead of lump sum taxation, it is far better to go for some progressive uh, taxation on either income or consumption, right? But the question now, suppose we know that we have to go with some distortionary taxation, but still there are taxes which are less distortionary than others. So the Pareto efficient tax structure, you should not, one should not, like I will say, confuse between Pareto efficiency and the Pareto efficient tax structure. Pareto efficient tax structure will uh, recognize that there are distortions, but it tries to minimize these distortions. Okay. So the trade-off. Trade-off is again, look back, it's efficiency and equity. So we're going back to that efficiency equity debate even when designing an optimal tax structure. So the question now that we'll ask is, what's the level of deadweight loss I'm ready to accept given a certain degree of decrease or level of decrease in the level of inequality. Now, can we compare these magnitudes? What we have seen is the deadweight loss related to the substitution effect so far. So there is something what we call, or there is some group of people whom we call the elasticity optimists, who believe that these elasticities of labor supply or the savings are quite low, and hence the distortions are low. On the other hand, there are people who believe, and we call them elasticity pessimists, that these elasticities are high. So when you look into it, we compare a proportional tax and a progressive tax. On the vertical axis, tax owed to the government. G is the level of government expenditure. So even with your income being zero, government has some expenditure. So with proportional tax, it's a flat increase. Progressive tax, this G is nothing but the subsidy that has to be given to the poor people or people who does not earn anything. Y hat is the break-even point for progressive taxation, for which the government starts taking taxes. So any income below Y hat is non-taxable. In fact, there are subsidies. On the other hand, this is much sharper, and hence at an income level like say Y hat prime, the tax generated from progressive taxation will dominate that generated by a proportional taxation. So instead of the tax rate, you now start considering the average tax rate with income. So the marginal tax rate for a proportional tax will be same. That will be the average rate. And the marginal tax rate for a progressive tax, that will be higher. And look, from that same Y hat, you keep on increasing. And this was exactly the point I said, say Y hat prime in the previous diagram. From where the marginal tax rate, the average tax rate from progressive tax crosses the marginal tax rate or average tax rate from proportional tax and tries almost like becomes an asymptote to the marginal tax rate for progressive tax. So this portion not required. These are like trivial things we have already taken care of. Yeah, so from here what we could see that yes, with progressive taxes we have much higher marginal tax rate. Now, if the marginal tax rate is higher, remember what happens? Because if the marginal tax rate goes up, then obviously the deadweight loss will also go, because it is related to what? The substitution effect. If the marginal tax is more, the substitution effect is more. And the substitution effect is more, the deadweight loss is more. It's a very simple linkage. If that is the case, then with progressive tax, I must have higher deadweight loss. Now, there are certain things we also need to understand about the substitution effect and income effect of low income individual and high income individual. Remember that movement from L to A to B, C to D to that part when we talk about income tax credit. For them, when the lower income individuals, both the substitution effect and the income effect are in the same direction, right? Moving from L to A. It leads to smaller labor supply. But for high income individuals, the income and substitution effects are in the opposite direction. Just try to relate the, I'm sorry, but it's very difficult. Let me try to again see whether I can shift to that, I can show that graph. Just hold on for a second. Yeah. The income effect tells you to work more. Substitution effect tells you to work less. Then the marginal increase in income and the substitution effect, they both in the same direction from L to A. But from C to D, completely offsetting. That's exactly what we are saying. Okay. So until and unless you reach that backward bending part, because to reach the backward bending part, your wage needs to be sufficiently high, beyond the point of inflection. Then what happens? You are on the upward, the positively sloped part of your labor supply curve. That means higher the wage, you will work more. So higher the wage tax, you work less. Until and unless your income effect dominates your substitution effect, progressive tax will lead to lower hours of work by individuals. Choice of lower hours of work. Okay, so that's all for today. I think it has been quite a long lecture. Have a look into the slides. And okay, let me close it. Yeah. Okay, so if you have any questions, please go ahead.